So, hello. I'm Sirick. I came onto the team, almost a year ago now, and initially I joined just to do some voiceover. I've done voiceover for a few of the games and a few of the mods, and I knew of the mod because I'd played it. I'm a big Fallout fan. I've played since the first games, even though I was maybe a bit too young for them. And after I saw some settlements come up, I thought, hey, this is pretty cool. I want to help this. I want to give some voices for it. Now, that was the initial reason that I joined, but somehow, I'm not entirely sure, I managed to trick kinggath into letting me onto the writing team. So that was unexpected. And initially, I had a writing partner, and we had a nice back and two. He got me up to speed because things had already sort of begun. I think I'd come in to replace someone. And then eventually, my writing partner disappeared, and I became the lead writer, which is insane. And so now I'm in charge of the main plotline of the mod, and I also get to tell lots of other people what assets to make. So I think I'm also the creative director. I'm not sure if that's the correct term. So right now I have 3 roles, and I'm loving all of them. And hopefully you'll also maybe hear my voice in the game somewhere. So keep an eye out for that.
I think your voice is actually already live in the game because you
Oh,
voiced Mr. Genius, which people are. I keep getting messages asking me when that quest is going to be finished because I think I tossed you the outline that we finally figured out. So if you haven't played this quest, spoiler alert. But the Mr. Genius plotline, I had a plan all for it, and then I ran into some technical issues. So I decided that rather than risking rushing it out for the big Industrial Revolution patch, we kind of like put a pin in it. It's just sitting in people's quest logs waiting for a patch when it's finished. So I think we have the outline done for that, but need to get the rest of the lines recorded before I can proceed. But obviously that's not top priority for you because you have a million hats you're wearing right now for our next big release.
yeah. I don't know why you gave me as many hats as you did.
You know what? When I find passionate people and I think they can take it, I give them more projects to work on. And you seem very, very passionate about being creative about stuff, so I think you can handle it.
Well, I like making stories, and I like working with other people who make stories, and it's nice to work in a big team full of people because wherever my weaknesses are, there's someone else. I'm not a coder. King Gaff is a coder, so there's a nice balance that happens. Just everyone in the team has their little space, and they tend to branch off into other spaces as well. And we all seem to fill the gaps that are necessary, and we seem to be able to make a game. So
Yeah, that's really what it's feeling like now, and that's I'm very excited for the next big release, is because it's finally feeling like all of the things that we've been talking about and all the things that I originally envisioned for this are kind of coming together now, and we're starting to see all the teams work together and bring the assets into a cohesive thing, and it really feels like it's an entirely new experience. So I'm very, very excited to get it out to the world. But we still got a lot to go. You said you tricked me, and it was funny because I think when you first contacted me about writing, you said, "Hey," because I think you probably saw. So we basically have a giant Discord server, just for the people listening, that we work out of, and we have people broken up into teams. And I think I mentioned this in the first dev video that most people don't recognize that they're on a separate team, but they kind of are. But I mix up some teams, and the one team I had mixed up right from the get-go was the voice actors and the character artists and some of the writers. So it was kind of like there was a blend. So like some of you had access to multiple channels in that regard. And I think you saw me talking to writers a lot, and you sent me a message saying, "Hey, if you have any extra writing, I'd be happy to throw my hat in the ring." And then I gave you a little project. You absolutely crushed it. And I actually, at this point, I can't remember what it was. Do you remember what the first writing project you did for Some Settlements was? Because I believe it's already in the mod.
I'm not entirely sure. There was a quest you threw at me, which it didn't meet the standards necessary, and I think that was the tester for if I could
Right. I think there was
rewrite
a
it to make it a bit
problem.
more natural.
Right. So I can't remember which quest it was. I think it was one of the ones in Industrial Revolution, but the writing was a little rocky. I don't even remember who did it. It might have been me, because a lot of times when we're running low on time, like I like writing, like I enjoy creative writing, but I know it's not a specialty of mine. It's not something I'm great at. So I think it might have been something I wrote and I had you fix it because
Maybe.
it didn't sound great. So, but yeah, you crushed that project. And then at that time, our one of our lead writers for the, and it's funny that the writing, so our actual lead writer is Danger, and he is more in charge of kind of managing the project on a whole. And then we had so basically, even talking to you, I have to reveal to the people listening to this. So this is probably why I'm not going to release this publicly until probably after release of this big project. But for the people watching the dev thing, we have a major quest line coming into Sim Settlements that's going to tie the settlement building pieces of the game into the rest of the game, because right now they're very disconnected. And so the guy who was working with Soul Reaver, who was your writing partner, he had some life stuff come up, and he just knew he wasn't gonna have enough time to commit to work on the project at the level we needed, and that's so I paired you up with Reaver, and it's worked out pretty well. And then Reaver also had some life stuff. This is and anyone, don't think this is a red flag or anything. This is very common in modding, is that real life always has to take precedent for people, and it's a very big commitment to be a modder on a project of this scope. So I'm actually very happy that people have been very honest and letting me know that, hey, I can't commit the amount of time that's needed to pull this off. So those people have left, and it kind of fell in your lap, and you've said so far you hadn't needed a partner, although I think we did end up getting you another partner in Bane recently, which I think is working out well.
Yeah, we kind of... well, I say I threw you an idea, which in my mind was just a throwaway idea. It's something rather minor we do, and it's actually turned out to be the main focus of the mod now, in a way. It's what the player character will be building up to. I'm not sure.
Yeah, and that I don't know. I'm not even going to talk about that. I don't want to get into the details to spoil it, but we have something rather big that came out as it was going to be just kind of a side thing, and to me, it captured my imagination, and it also solved a big problem with converging. God, I feel like even just talking about this, we're giving away too much, but also probably making people on the other end be like, "What is it?" But it came out. I think it's going to be very important to the mod going forward. And so you've got not only do you have a lot of hats, but you also are carrying a lot of weight on your shoulders, because
if I
this
go,
project could.
it was rude.
So do you thrive under that kind of pressure, or are you nervous? Like, how do you feel having that kind of burden on your back, as far as like the work you're in charge of could make or break the next phase?
Nervous is maybe the wrong word. I've got a background in theatre, so I know the pre-stage jitters that you usually get. And most people tend to fear that they're gonna mess up in stage. They're gonna make themselves look stupid. I don't tend to care about that much. I don't mind if I look stupid, probably because I look stupid most of the time, so I don't really mind. But I always do worry that I'm going to ruin the show for everyone else. So everyone who's put the work into it, I don't want to mess it up, because we've all been working so hard up until this point to put on a show for everyone. And if I mess it up, I don't care too much about the audience, which maybe I shouldn't say, because we're making this for an audience. But I more care about everyone else's. So slightly nervous, maybe, because I don't want to do something that's going to wreck it for everyone else who's been working really hard. But at the same time, that does push me forward when I see everyone else putting in the work necessary, filling in the areas I can't do myself. I work with a level designer, Business Vulture. We just get a great back and two going. I'm not a level designer. I get the fundamental basics, and maybe I could do it at a push, but he takes what I give him and just runs with it. And then that gives me sort of what I need to then run with what I need. It's a nice back and two that I've noticed. Anytime I maybe do feel I'm getting slightly overwhelmed, someone will just step in, and we'll just have a talk. We'll get some work done, and that's it. Now we can move on. So nervous a little bit, but at the same time, it's fun. I do enjoy it.
Well, and I think you said you don't care about the audience, but indirectly you do, because the success or failure is basically on reception. So if people love it when we release it, then that means the team will feel they succeeded, which means we'll have succeeded. So even though you're mostly worried about the team in that regard, I think ultimately the judges to decide whether or not we drop the ball are the audience.
Yeah, that might have been not the best way to express it. I obviously do care somewhat, at least, what the audience thinks of the product, because it's a product we're making for them. And so if they enjoy it, great, we made a good project. Yeah, I maybe maybe that wasn't exactly true when I said I don't care about. I think it's more I don't care about making myself look stupid in front of an audience.
Right, right.
So
You don't. So
I
you're
do
not
care about
interested.
you. I care about you. Anyone who's listening, I do care, and I really hope you enjoy it. So
Yeah, it
sorry
sounds like what
if I
you.
made
It
it.
sounds like what you're saying is you're not worried about having the fame and glory for yourself. You want the project to succeed as a whole.
In a way, the project is me. It's part of me. I think we've all got something like that. We're all putting a part of ourselves into it. So yeah, I want
You,
that bit of me to
you
get some fame and
literally,
glory.
you're putting your voice right into it. So
That's true. I've maybe made myself voice a few characters I've written
I
just because
also
I enjoy
think
writing the characters so much.
I also think that you put your face in on one of the characters. I won't mention which character in case that's true, but I have an inkling that you put a little bit of your face into it too.
Yeah, it might be true. I think by the time anyone plays the mod, and if we do manage to include this thing that we are currently talking about, you'll figure out quite quickly. I'm sure you'll recognize my voice. It's probably the character with the least messing around. It's just going to be my voice, so you'll probably notice who that is. And yeah, that kind of looks like me. So if you like that character, thanks.
So now you mentioned you voiced other games. What kind of games have you done before this? Obviously, I think I've seen your name listed on other Fallout 4 mods.
Um, I can't remember off the top of my head if I have worked on other Fallout 4 mods. I have worked on the Skywind mod, a much smaller role. I think that was my first step into actually trying to do voices for mods, at least bigger mods. I've also done some for the game Baldur's Gate and Baldur's Gate 2. It's one of my all-time favorites, so it's still got a very strong modding community, and people like to make characters for that. And so I thought, hey, I'll give my voice to some of those characters. I have no
That
idea if
is
those mods have come out.
that is shocking that there are mods for that game. I that was probably what got me into RPGs was the Baldur's Gate series, as far as like getting really hooked on that style of video game, because I remember that really started a flood of those into the market, because then after that that's when like Fallout came out after that, and then we've got like Icewind Dale and just a whole host of great games in that genre, that isometric RPG. And Baldur's Gate, what an incredible game that was.
Yeah, if anyone wants to go replay that game and you didn't know there's a thriving modding community, it's been around forever and they are still making stuff. So I'd highly recommend it. It's a great game. I've also done a few independent studio games. I think there's one or two on Steam. One off the top of my head I can remember, I believe, is Judgment Apocalypse Simulator. I think I do the narration for that, of the opening and the ending scenes. Apparently it's a good game. I've not played it myself yet, but everyone said it's quite good. So hey, go play that if you enjoy similar games to the old Fallouts, but with more of a tactical strategy element to them. So I'm not plugging that, but they
Now,
paid me, so I might as well.
right. I say, do they pay you for those indie games?
I think at least that one I know they did pay me for. I think I've done one or two where payment has been offered, but maybe I've turned down. I know, for example, on this you very very kindly said you will cover expenses for anything we need, but there's nothing. My mic's working. That's all I need. So maybe if that broke, I'd take you up on that. But
Yeah, I think for so far it hasn't really come up for anybody. It's been, I think I've purchased some software for a few people, but other than that, it's not. The expenses tend to be on all of our server costs, and they're going to come up when we start having to hire some voice actors of some background, like some people with some resumes. Essentially, that's where the bulk of the funding is going to come. Right, exactly. People who we shouldn't be. We have no. There's some people we're going to hire that we have no right to work with, given the fact that this is a free mod. But that's what we do.
Mm-hmm. We'll have to have a break there, 'cause I can't
lots
think
of
what we're talking
lots of indie games you've worked on. You worked on Skywind, which I think that's how we got connected, is because our sound guy had a big connection with Skywind, and I know I spoke to the lead designer on Skywind, and we talked about advertising each other's projects among our voice actors to try and share some resources, because it's very hard to put together a big mod. Very, very hard.
Yeah, there are a lot of voiceover artists I've seen on Sim Settlements who are also on Skywind. I think there's a lot of crossover in terms of those people who like to do projects like this. Oh,
And
that's another
especially
mod.
Kobus is a big one of that. He loves to just see projects succeed, so he's constantly going to different servers and like saying like, "Hey, I've got somebody who might work well with you."
I've actually just remembered another mod I did a voice for, which is a Stellaris mod, Star Trek New Horizons. I do the voice of Q in that, even though I sound nothing like John Delancey, but I'm a big Star Trek fan, and it's a mod I enjoyed. So there you go. You can go maybe listen to me on that.
So
Oh, and
how
I
excited
do
are
some
you
races as
about?
well.
You say how excited are you that Patrick Stewart's coming back?
Ooh, I don't know. I'm mixed. I'm a purist when it comes to Star Trek. I was never a fan of the new movies because to me it wasn't Star Trek. It was action films, and that's not Star Trek. They missed the point as far as I'm concerned. So
Yeah.
I'm not a big fan of Destiny.
I think
No,
the nice
Discovery.
thing with
Sorry.
that I think the nice thing about those movies is that they brought it to a wider audience. They showed people that Star Trek could be beyond, like, you don't have to be a nerd to enjoy the Star Trek
But
ideas.
I am a nerd, so I like old Star Trek. I
Right,
love
right. I'm
Patrick
not
Stewart,
saying that.
love
I
Picard.
think as to me the Star Trek movies represent the same thing that happens to games. Like, and this is why a lot of people get. I've actually had this conversation with everybody about the fact that the things going mainstream is actually often a benefit to the purists because it brings in new money. So then you get to have bigger and bolder things. So, like, for example, Fallout going to Bethesda and becoming more of a mainstream product. Yes, it kind of sucks because you start to see some of your systems get diminished. But fortunately, unlike movies and television, with video games, we can go back and mod them. So then we get the benefit of the high production value with still being able to recreate the way we like to play. Obviously, television shows and movies, it's a little less that so, but I think that, like, getting Patrick Stewart back would never have happened without the money that came in from the Star Trek franchise from the movies, because that franchise wasn't it was kind of stagnated, and it wasn't until after the movies that then we got like Discovery and now these next couple of shows they're working on.
Yeah, well, we'll see how I feel about it. If they, I don't want more Next Generation. That's been done. If I want to watch that, I'll go watch it again. But at the
Right.
same time, they got to respect the canon. They got to respect the character, and if they don't, I'm going to be upset about that.
What did you feel about the next gen movies, like the last one, like Nemesis and stuff?
Oh, the next gen movies, they're their own thing altogether. So many people can complain that they they ignore a lot of characterization. They ignore a lot of plot lines and things that the series already touched upon. A great example is Picard's character does change drastically in one of the final episodes of the Next Generation. Wesley goes to a planet, and there's some sort of Native American culture there that space government's going to go move off their reservations or something, and Picard gives a very dispassionate speech of what is the right and wrong and all this stuff, and Wesley doesn't want to listen. He wants to go save everyone, but that's just going to cause more problems. It's a wonderful grayness that the Next Generation likes to put across. Flash forward a few years in one of the movies. I'm trying to remember the title off the top of my head. I can't, but it's the one with the Baku where they go down to the planet. Exact same situation, but this time Picard is now on the same page Wesley was. Doesn't make any sense for the character. They just disrespected that. It was maddening to me, but I enjoyed them anyway. Like you said, it's been brought to a wider audience, as it were. So you will see changes because they're trying to sell it to a wider audience, and you do get to see some cool things you wouldn't get to see otherwise. But I am a fan of I like TV series over films generally because you get more characterization, you get more story. Which is maybe why I got into writing.
Right. I think what they missed the mark on, and part of it is it's kind of the limiting nature of films. Like, I think that TV ultimately, and I think this is why Netflix and HBO are doing so well and why their series are so intriguing, is they don't have to compress things down into a 90-minute or 120-minute story, so they can go into a little nuance and they can work with gray. And I think they underestimate. So I think part of it is the delivery method of a movie. Like, you're kind of forced to do that. You have to have your full arc happen in that limited time span. But I think the other part of it is I think they underestimate audiences' desire for the gray, because I think back then, like that, I mean, those movies were what, probably 10 years old now. The next gen movies. I think the last Nemesis one was 10 years ago, maybe longer. But I think they underestimate the desire that the general public has for, more intriguing stories that are, a little grayer and not so black and white. Because you're seeing that now with all these popular TV shows and stuff, is that they're willing to, like, let everything be a little gray and leave a lot to an audience interpretation. And personally, I enjoy that. I think it's way better that way, and I like seeing it in games and these television shows, and you don't get a lot of that in movies.
See, I'm right there with you, but at the same time, I think they take it too far. I think they miss a lot of the things that have to go with a grey outlook on things. You need that character who you can see that maybe they do fail, maybe they do really mess up, and maybe they do bad things, but you can also see there's something more. Like the best characters are always you, but better than you, and so you can look up to them. They are the everyman, but they're just that little bit better. So they might screw up a bit more than you, but they also might succeed more than you. And I think they kind of miss that sometimes in some of the newer shows and things.
So you think they're going too far with the gray, and they're
tiny
not
bit.
portraying you. So you want to see more heroism, more evil, a little more distinction on over one line or the other.
It always comes back to the grey in the end, but you need to see characters. You need characters who you love. I'm a big fan of the old series, I guess at this point. Stargate. I love Stargate. If you're to put all the stars in order, I love Stargate, Star Trek, and then Star Wars last. Sorry. But I think Stargate is a great character show, and you get to see a lot of the grey there, but they're also very heroic. You look up to the characters, you love them, you want to see them succeed. You know they're not going to die. It's a TV show. They're going to be the next episode, but you still feel for it. And I think that's kind of like, I watched Game of Thrones, very popular series. But eventually I just got tired of so many people are dying. It's like, I like that character, but they're dead now. And so I lose that sort of connection I have. And I think I've seen other people have the same sort of fatigue, that sort of, you need something more sometimes.
Yeah, I felt the same way at first in the first couple of seasons of Game of Thrones, because I am one of the sinner nerds who hasn't read the books yet. But I felt like at first it was like, okay, how can I get engaged with this if I don't know what characters I'm supposed to root for or what characters I can fall in love with? But I think after about like season 3 or 4, it was very clear who the final characters were going to be for the most part. Like I think you can see, which characters are going to make it to the end, or at least make it to the last season. I think has been pretty clear. And then, but I do enjoy. There's a lot of tension you gain from that. Is that you don't get otherwise, and that's something I think more TV shows and movies are experimenting with. The idea of that, like, if it's not automatically known that this character will survive, then our scenes that are tense will become more tense because you actually don't know how it's going to play out. Whereas, like, in most action movies, you're just like, oh, well, The Rock's not going to die, so the scene is, there's no tension here whatsoever.
See, that's true, but they take it too far to the point you just expect everyone to die. So
right.
You don't get involved at this point. Like, well, they're all going to die. Why do I care?
Right. So yeah, you got to find that happy median, I think, and that's probably a hard line to walk for writers and directors.
Well, that's why I like games. Games allow you to decide who lives and who dies, depending on your actions, what you say, what you do. Most of my favorite games are always the RPG genre. It's sort of a dying genre because it's getting phased into shooters and things. And so there's, as you said, when things become more mainstream, they have to strip away some of the stuff that won't appeal to wider audiences. I think the Mass Effect series is a great example of that. You can see the progression of the games as it becomes more of a shooter. Now, don't get me started on the ending. Everyone hates that ending. But if we ignore the ending, that is one of the best games series of all time as far as I'm concerned. It's just,
it really was a great series.
Right.
I actually think they do, and I give the same props to Bethesda on this. Is I think that they're for the most part those two franchises. Now I can't speak to Andromeda. I did not play that. I've heard enough bad things. I just didn't waste my time because I don't have enough time to play every game anymore, which is a weird thing. Like I remember in my youth being like, there's never enough games for me, and I'm playing every game that comes out. And now it's like, if you tried to play, I don't think you could play through every game that's released every year. I don't think it's possible, like, to put in the amount, like, to actually see every, all do 100% every game that comes out. I don't think anyone could do it now. I don't think it's possible. But anyway, without digressing down that road, I think Mass Effect, I think they did a great job of streamlining, of making the gameplay more intriguing and more interesting to play. Like, obviously, they had to cut some systems and they did push it more actiony, but I think they did a good job of it. Like, I feel like it's way more enjoyable for me to play 2 and 3 than it is to play 1 now if I go back. I don't know. How do you feel about that?
And I miss the inventory of 1. I liked that I could collect my gear, and that's an old RPG thing, I think. That's a holdover from games like Baldur's Gate. I like that. But they did it very clunky. It didn't transition well into a shooter. And the shooting mechanics in 1 are terrible. Two, two's probably my favorite. I think it's got the best balance of them all, and I think everyone just loves the because it's so character focused, and it's so you can end up with no one at the end. Shepard can die at the end, and that is a legitimate end of the game. And they shrug and say, "Yep, they're all dead. You are dead, but you succeeded. Well done." That's just I love games that do that. That's not canon because there's a Mass Effect 3.
Right.
But just to do that blew me away when I realized you can die and lose everyone. That's great.
Yeah, and it's not common either. I think most games that's not a feasible ending, and it's because there's that sequel mindset. I think that, and it's hard to deal with. Like if you want, especially because I think most companies now recognize that the real money is in franchising. You've got to be able to come up with a series of characters and worlds that players want to invest tons in, and that's why microtransactions are a thing. Is you want players to fully invest in it, which means they can't kill off. They can't be as Game of Thronesy. They've got to keep those characters around. So yeah, it's a bold choice for them to have allowed that ending to exist in the first place.
But they obviously kind of ignored it with Mass Effect 3 because hey,
right, and how else can you do it?
Are alive.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess you can always throw in tropes. Like there's a million sci-fi methods to resurrect people. Whether it be cloning or saying the death didn't really happen, or there's all sorts of ways you can get around it. But just the leaving it like that was a bold move to be like, oh, like that's an actual ending. Jeez.
It makes player choice important, which I always think that makes it your story. Then I have my Shepard when I play Mass Effect. He's mine. He's me. He reflects how I would deal with the situation, even though it's essentially middle of the ground. Renegade and Paragon, and you're just going to probably pick one of those and go towards it. But even giving you the option and then allowing that to have, it's not so much the dialogue, it's the ramifications of the dialogue, it's the ramifications of your choices. Choices are important. I think we can all agree Mass Effect 4 definitely didn't do too good on the choices at the end there, which I think I'd say our mod kind of rectifies a little bit, or at least we've tried to.
You mean Fallout 4? You said Mass Effect 4.
Oh,
yeah. Yeah, I think, and actually, one of the things I was going to actually suggest you do if you haven't already. So there's a mod that came out called Project Valkyrie, and I personally am not a huge fan of the mod author's work, and nothing against Thuggy Smurf and his team. I just don't. I think that having all of the like strip clubs and dancers and stuff like that, I think that pushes. I know it's like they would probably defend it and say it's realistic that there would be lots of hookers and prostitutes in an end of the world situation, which I agree with, but it tends to then it automatically brings up those lovers lab things and like brings up that idea, that reputation that Skyrim mods have for being all about pervert stuff. Like even though it's people trying to bring in full reality, yes, there are probably a subset of the player base who gets their rocks off from this stuff, and so more power to them. But I think putting that stuff to front and center in the mod, like pushing the nudity and the dancing and stuff like that, it really detracts from the quality of it overall, just because it brings up to me, this is how I feel about it. But anyway, so that's one thing that they're known for, and they always put in their screenshots and videos is lots of pictures of these like weird naked dance clubs they have. But the point being is that they did something really cool in that mod, which was they created new characters and new quest lines and new ways to end all of the main quests so that it could be more player choice driven. So there's a lot of different endings in there. I believe they set up a method for you to create a synth version of your spouse, which I thought was wonderful, and that's something I always thought made sense in the game. So that mod aims to fix a lot of that. So I was going to suggest you take some time and go play around with that and see if there are any ideas they've already covered so that we don't rehash them.
See, I would, but then I fall into the trap of I never want to view something or play something that I might accidentally take ideas from. Because you don't intend to, but it is going to influence the things.
Well, at the same time, if we already did, it would be nice not to get called plagiarists on it. You know what I mean? To be
That's
like,
true, but I can absolutely say 100% honestly, I've not played it. I didn't intend to. I mean, I've experienced this before when writing. You come up with what you think is the greatest idea ever, and then you think about it for an hour and you realize, oh, that's from A, B, and C. I love those things. That's where I got those ideas from.
I think that happens a lot in games. I think that in general, and this is something that I think we've been very fortunate about from the games industry, is that people they haven't gone on a copyright spree, because I think that, or a trademarking or whatever you call it, because I think that's something the IT industry is suffering horribly from right now, is patent trolling. Is there are so many people who have patented so many different software things that it's nearly impossible anymore to write truly unique software that you're not violating some major companies' agreements. And I'm shocked that we haven't had that happen in gaming. Like, it could be I could very easily have seen a situation to where, like, for example, EA patented the gameplay loop of SimCity, and then all of a sudden you couldn't have any simulation games out there that follow a similar pattern. So it's shocking to me we haven't had that happen in the games industry, because I think, and it's a benefit, I think, because I think a lot of the games now are heading in a direction about building out a cool world and then letting you just try all these different gameplay systems in it. Like, there's not a lot left unexplored as far as gameplay mechanics when you get down to the nitty gritty of, like, we've been talking about this with quests, is that there's only so many types of quests you can run, whether it be, go fetch a MacGuffin, or, kill X enemies, or clear out a space. Like, if you break it down, it's kind of how, like, they say there's only 7 stories. Isn't that what it is? That there's only so many, or there's only so many stories. I don't remember what the number is, but if you break things down to their core elements, there's only so many ways you can play a game or make a game in a computer space. And so I think it's like be getting creative about combining those pieces in new ways. So in that way, like, every game greatly influences the games that come after it.
Well, pretty much. I mean, we did see something like that. I believe it was PUBG who tried to sue Fortnite for that formula. They failed, thankfully, because that's not really something we want to see happen, because PUBG kind of took that from somewhere else as well. So we don't want to get into that whole thing of copywriting a mechanic or a style of play. I think you're right there. It's a slippery slope, but I think it's been avoided, and I don't think it will ever become an issue. But
I hope not, because it is an issue in software of, like, there's only so many ways to efficiently solve problems, and for people to be able to patent those solutions is absolutely insane to me from a coding standpoint. It's like, I'm sure I have software out there. Unfortunately, my software that I've released is not popular enough to garner the attention of lawyers, but that where, like, I've just incidentally copied somebody's idea, even if I've never seen a line of their code, just because there are only so many ways to solve engineering problems. And so the fact that we've allowed, that they were able to get patents, mostly due to the fact that the people in charge of giving out patents don't understand them. Like, it's very great that we haven't had that happen in games.
Well, do you think we fall into that trap of just retreading the same ground with some of our quests, or do you think we've managed to
absolutely.
circumvent
I'm sure. Absolutely. We have already done it. Like, some of the quests that we have released, when you break it down, like, essentially you still always end up in that trope of, like, are they fetching an item? Are they having to, manipulate their way through a conversation? Are they killing certain bad guys? Like, they generally always follow those patterns. And I don't know that there's a way to break out of that, because I think there's certain limitations you have within the fact that, you're in a shooter. You have limitations in the game engine, like we can't, and you also have to assume that you need to give every player a way through it. So then all of a sudden you can't, like, for example, lean on charisma checks, because then all of a sudden you block out content from certain players, and it gets very difficult in that sense to come
I
up
will
with
say
new
this.
elements.
Writing for Armod, I appreciate Bethesda a lot more in the difficulty they have actually trying to create a story, a narrative that will go from A to B to C and make sense, at the same time of trying to allow player freedom, because you hear so many criticisms of every choice is yes or later. And yeah, we fall into that trap as well. Well, I fall into that trap. I know I've written that.
Yeah,
and it's just a limitation of what we have to play with, really.
I think it's a limitation of, and this is something I've been considering, and I don't know what the solution is, and maybe the solution is you can't do it. Is that, to me, it's that what I'm starting to learn from this, and I've been, by analyzing existing games we play, is that I don't know if main stories make sense in open world games. It might be that you can't have narratives like that are integral to the core experience. I think if you really want them to exist in there, I almost think you have to let the player fail at them. Like, you have to let it go to a point where the player just can't complete that quest. Like, that's kind of like I think that's the only way to do it, because the other problem I see in these games, and it was very apparent in Fallout 4's main story, is in order to keep up that emotional impact, you have to keep the player very, very busy and it's hard to, or you have to keep them very focused on the quest, and it's very hard to do that when you're dangling carrots all around them with side quests and things.
Well, I think everyone knows who plays a Bethesda game. It's not really about the story; it's about the world. And often Bethesda give us a fantastic world that where we can go make our own stories, either just by playing the game or by going and modding it and sort of expanding the areas we think, hey, there should be a character here, or this town needs more a renovation. It needs more something to it that is maybe lacking in the vanilla. So, I mean, we should thank them for that. I mean, we wouldn't be here if we didn't see something in this great game where we thought, you know what, we can make that better.
Absolutely. And I think they do a great job with the world building, and I'm just curious if, and maybe this is and some of this is personal. Like, so for me, I find that I can't let myself complete a main quest until I'm done playing. Like, I think to me is completing that main quest is wrapping the experience up. And so, but I think what would make a better experience in Bethesda games is to just go right through the main quest and skip the side quests until later. As I think that's probably the best way to play, to actually experience those story beats and have that emotion that they want you to have. But I think if you take 100 hours of side questing in the middle of all that, it's very hard to hit the story at a pace that makes sense, that will actually make you feel something for the characters.
I think we're going to see a change in how things like that are done. I think they're using the old, you can look back to Baldur's Gate that we talked about before. It's the exact same way the story's told, really. Different engine, different game, but it's the same thing. And you could get away with it more in older games because you were somewhat limited in either the interface or just in the technology available to make the game. But now we're getting to the point where we can do some pretty amazing things, but we're stuck with this old style of storytelling. So I'm not sure if we'll be able to do anything different until maybe we have like AI that can write the story on the fly and adapt to what you're doing. And maybe you complete the game in a way that the developers never intended you to do, but you actually complete it. That'll be cool. Well, maybe a few decades off of that still, but hey, I'm looking forward to that if we do get something like that.
Yeah, it's cool to see that we have all the technologies coming up to pull that off eventually. Like, did you see a couple of years ago, and not a lot of people seem to have seen this when I bring it up, Adobe did a demonstration where they could listen to a few minutes of someone's voice and then fully emulate it in real time.
I have not seen that demonstration, no.
It seems to have disappeared, and I wonder if that's for like it seems like one of those conspiracy things, like where it could go away because the repercussions of that are insane. I mean, could you just imagine if all of a sudden we weren't able to rely on audio transcriptions? Like if it's like recordings are no longer eligible in court because they could have been manufactured in a computer. Like, that's terrifying in the real life sense, but from a gameplay perspective, that's amazing, because then all of a sudden, like right now, one of the biggest hurdles I think we have, or you guys have as writers, is having to write for an existing player dialogue, in that you're very limited in kind of the direction you can take conversations without some contrived or very limited player answers, and that all of a sudden you could just write any dialogue you want and have the computer generate perfect dialogue for that, or perfect inflection and sound for that particular voice actor. Like, for gaming, that sounds amazing.
That would be amazing, and it definitely would change the way this project has gone, because, as you said, we did not manage to hire back the original voice actor for the protagonist player, for Nate or Nora. I'm not even sure we could. I'm not sure if there's contractual things where maybe they couldn't work for us, so we're having to reuse all the old audio, I think, from the base vanilla game, not even the DLC.
Correct.
Just so
how has that been as
it.
a writer? How has that been as a challenge? Has it helped you, do you think? Like, because I know I've talked about with some of the other people I've interviewed, is that having a lot of creative restraints actually makes the blank canvas easier to deal with. So how has the writing for the existing dialogue affected your writing? Have you liked it, hated it? Has it helped? Has it hurt?
Both. I've loved it and I've hated it. You hate it because you will have an idea in your head of how this quest is going to go, and you maybe get halfway into it, and then you realize, I don't have any player lines that can progress this or make any sense whatsoever. So often what you'll have to do is just use the new character you've put in there to say what you need the player to say, which it's not that natural, and maybe a few players will notice, well, it's kind of weird that character said that, but I think they'll understand quite quickly, well, there's no way they could have the player say that line. So we have used that trick here and there. But at the same time, in that limiting you, it allows you to go areas you maybe would not have gone otherwise. There's definitely a few quests of mine which have ended differently or had different outcomes because, hey, that's a cool play line, and that kind of ties into what I've already written, and so I can use that and have the quest end in this particular way. Without going into too much detail, there was a quest near the end of our mod with a plant. Originally, it wasn't going to be a plant, it was just going to be a random delivery, but just that one word of plant made this whole area spawn around it, and suddenly I had a character. I had where that character was, what they've been doing, just from this one line of plant. So there are things like that, and that makes you happy when you trip across this line. But generally speaking, there's a lot of time of you just typing in random words, random keywords, trying to find a line that the player has said that would make sense. I'd say most of my time has been spent going through the player lines, trying to find that one line that will work. More time than has actually been spent writing, I think.
Do you feel like you've fairly conquered that? Like, do you feel like you've got a good flow now and you can work a little more smoothly within those constraints?
I have my list. I have my list of cool things the player says where I can maybe see at some point I could use that, and so I don't have to try and find a word and hope that the player says a sentence with this word in it. And I also have a list of phrases and words the player character says that I can apply to other characters that I'm writing or other quests that I'm writing. And in doing that, they have shaped the way those quests are going. We have two optional characters, who I won't get too much into, but the player lines alone have dictated how their quest is going to go. And in some ways, it's really, really cool because the player lines were just perfect and it makes sense. Again, they're somewhat limiting and somewhat vague, but they kind of have to be. But it just gives you ideas you wouldn't otherwise have. It's been a unique challenge that I've not had to deal with before, but I think I've done a decent job.
Yeah, I think that was when I brought on each new writer. It was describing that challenge to them. I think was like that was kind of a litmus test to see if they could handle it. It was like when some of them, when I told them that they would not be able to write any player dog, they're like, "Oh, I don't know if I can do this," because it's such a unique challenge. And I think you've got to have. I think you got to have a fair good of experience with writing to be willing to take that on. There's also the challenge of writing branching dialogue that's meaningful, of knowing that, and I think you've alluded to this already, of that you want to have the player have meaningful choice, and doing that essentially means that you're writing multiple stories concurrently. Essentially, you have to be willing to you can't force the story into a certain direction if you want the player choice to be meaningful.
Yeah, as I said before, I appreciate Bethesda a lot more in the difficulties they have in having a main plot line where the player has to do these things and they can't really do it this other way. In older games, you could maybe think of alternate solutions to end this quest. No, you can't do that anymore because you need the Brotherhood alive, or the way Bethesda did it is the Minutemen will always survive. You can't get rid of the Minutemen. They're your lifeline. And we've used that as well. So I appreciate it. As a player, it annoys me. But as a writer, I can see exactly why they did that and why it's necessary. Doesn't make it any less pleasant for a player, but you kind of it gives you more understanding, and so you're a tiny little bit less aggressive towards Bethesda in a way that I've noticed many people are. I think if you try and do what they did, and you'll run across the exact same problems, and you will suddenly understand, that's why all my options are exactly the same.
Right, and I think one of the things that's interesting to me with that, and this is why I don't know which direction to go going forward in RPGs, is then players. Well, the other complaint you get. So, say if you open things up to a lot of player interpretation, the other problem you then have is that the story ends up not being as meaningful because it's impossible to put in the effort to give a meaningful experience to every possible combination of things is almost undoable within the time constraints and budget of a game development. Of like, in order to give out 50 different endings and have them all be meaningful, I think it was possible in games. Like I've seen it happen in like one of my favorite all-time RPGs that had a lot of different meaningful endings was Chrono Trigger, and doing that in those style of games is much easier than in a fully voiced game done by at the level games are produced now. It's a much different thing than adding a few new text lines or some new procedural timed battles. Like there's a big difference in those two things. So like taking the production value into consideration and the cost of it, like that has to influence things heavily, and how much they can actually pull off in the writing.
I think the way most companies do that these days, they solve the issue, is it's not really the player dialogue, it's the player actions. Even if it's this exact same action, even if everyone does the exact same thing, if they at least make the player do that thing, the player will feel that, yeah, I did that. So it could be the exact same story every time. It doesn't change. Bioshock is a good example, where you've even got this meta story of you are the puppet. You have no choice, which is, as far as I know, they pulled that up at the last few minutes, and it just fits so well. And I think they were a lot more clever than they meant to be, and they knew it. But it was great because you realize that everything you've been doing as the player, you kind of had no choice in. You were stuck in this very limited path, and that's the game's story. Then that's clever. That's tying it into something mechanic-wise, something the player will always have to do in order to progress, and that they will want to do. Because it's just you hitting the keys on your keyboard or jabbing on your controller. You did that. It's your action. So I think it's often the actions more so these days than the dialogue. The dialogues, it's set dressing. But the actions themselves are often, that's where, again, Mass Effect, I think, is a good example of, you can go through that game multiple times and you could kind of ignore all the dialogue, but you could see different actions every time. And so I think the actions often have that's a clever way of making it seem like there's a choice, and often there is. Sometimes there isn't, like in Fallout 4.
So yeah, so it's funny you mentioned that Bioshock ending, I think, had ripples through the game industry and still is today. I think that the ending of Fallout, or the reveal moment in Fallout 4, spoiler alert, the reveal ending in Fallout 4, that it wasn't even really the ending, but that reveal moment where Sean is your father, I think that was their attempt to capture that Bioshock moment. That moment was, to me, was so fantastic and amazing as a storytelling trope and so shocking. That I think a lot of game developers were like, I want to do that. Like, I want to have that kind of impact. Because to me, I was like that was one of those moments where I set down the controller afterward and I'm like, holy shit, that was fantastic. Like, it was just like, it just hit me so hard. And for games don't do that very often. Like, games are generally considered kind of a fun thing, and I think that was one of those moments in game history of where it was like, oh, like, you can really impact a player heavily with a story. And I know lots of games have done it before that. I'm sure there are tons and tons of titles before that, but to me, that was the biggest mainstream game to do it at that level. And I think I think a lot of game developers felt the same way and wanted to capture that same thing, because I see more games trying to do that, trying to have that shock moment in the story at some point.
I think it needs to say something, though. It doesn't need to be just a shock moment. It needs to... Bioshock says something. Because the player character is a puppet. It's a puppet of the player. But it's also a puppet of everyone in the story. That's pretty clever. And as I said, I don't think they realized how clever it was when they came up with that. But it did have that ripple effect. And so you see, even Bioshock Infinite, you see the similar thing. I don't think they do it quite as well. Even though I like Infinite as far more as a story, I think the world it creates is a little... not as good as the original Bioshock, but you can see, I think Skyrim did a better job creating a story than Fallout did, and I'm not entirely sure why that is. I don't know if it's a limiting factor of the setting, or I don't know.
My thoughts on the Fallout 4 story were that they had two problems. One is they didn't give you enough time invested in the beginning part of the game to get attached to the characters. I think they needed to, and obviously, like, to try and mainstream that sequence, you don't want to bore people with like pre-war living. But I think they needed maybe to have more time in the vault before you got frozen or something. Some time to fall in love with the character and, like, care about your spouse and kid. I think that was one thing. And I think the other problem is just the pacing of that story, I think, required you to force the player right through. I think that if you play the Fallout 4 story, this is just a theory of mine, I haven't done it, but looking at that is like, everyone jokes about, I don't care about Sean. I'm not going to rush off to do that. And it's like, oh, I've got, like, because in that first series where you're going up and through where you find Preston and his gang, there's tons of talk of Sean. Your character's voice files are very panicked. And then you go start doing all these side quests and stuff. Then when you come back to the main quest and your character is panicked again in the voice about Sean, it seems contrived, because it's like, really? You just spent 20 hours helping people fetch Nuka-Cola and shit like that. Like, it takes away a lot of the impact that was supposed to come of that. Because I think that if they had played, in a normal linear game, I think that story would have worked quite well. But I think in the open world of Fallout, where you're encouraged to go explore and get sidetracked, it doesn't work well.
I think it may also be a character thing. If I look back on previous games I enjoyed, or even something like New Vegas, I remember a lot of the characters really clearly. I remember loving them, or hating them, or loving to hate them. I don't think I had quite the same reaction with any of the Fallout 4 characters. There's definitely ones I like, and there's companions I'll often take along with me. I like Nick, and I think they thankfully did a lot with Nick. But at the same time, they're underdeveloped. Mass Effect, great example of characters done to the point where they are people and they become your friends. If you could get something like that in Mass Effect 4, in Fallout 4, or the next Fallout game, that I think they'd nail it. Then they don't need a great story. You can have a blank start story where you can be a Gordon Freeman character where you don't say anything. You don't. The character is you essentially. You step into the shoes and you speak for your actions. But as long as you got those good characters, I think they make the story more than the actual story sometimes. I think maybe Fallout 4 was lacking that a tiny bit. I don't think there's any particular characters who really stuck with me, unlike previous games I've played.
Yeah, I have trouble judging that because I'm so I'm so invested in the Fallout 4 universe with how much time I spend modding it that I would have to make that judgment call after a few years of being away to forget the characters, because right now they're in my face all the time. So are you on the side of wishing games would go back to Fallout 3 and New Vegas style of like just text dialogue for the player and let the characters speak, or are you happy with their move to voiced dialogue for the player?
I think it depends on the character and what they want to do with it. If it's a pre-established character, then it can work. Like the new God of War game, there's a pre-established character there, and you are taking on the role of that character, but it's not you. If the character is meant to be you or an extension of you, where you can customize them, you can name them, you can change their appearance, I think maybe you have to get rid of the voicing, because there are so many times when the player character in Fallout 4 will say something in a way that you would not say it. Even though it's the exact same words you would say, you would not say it that way. So when it's just the text, you can read into it what you want. I think maybe that works better for when you are meant to be the character.
I would love to see if they did that, like if they decided to revert back for a game, what the general consensus in the public would be. Like, is that something that the average user would accept, or would they be pissed about it? Because I think that we always have to watch out for those traps of nostalgia, of being like, I prefer it this way. But like, I personally, I've tried to go back and play some older games that I have great love for, like for example Fallout 1, and I can't do it. Like the gameplay style is too slow, and I don't have the patience for it as I once did.
Oh, our attention spans have definitely dropped. I can't play old games like that the way I used to be able to.
Right. So I think like part of that is, if they ever tried to roll it back, would we accept it, or would it? And I think some of us will get a chance to try that out with some of the new big giant mods that are finally finishing. Like for example, New California. Like that's one I'm actually going to install, and it'll be because I haven't played New Vegas in years, so it'll be interesting to see if I have the attention span to dive into that game and give it the chance it deserves.
If you ever find you have trouble following voiced dialogue for not the player character, but for a character you're talking to, turn off the subtitles. I have to do that in every game I play where there is voiced dialogue, but also subtitles, because I'll read it and I won't pay attention to what the actual voice actor is saying for that character. And then I've got to wait for them to catch up. It's infuriating. So if you find your attention wanders, try turning off subtitles if you can for things
I
you're
thought
listening to. And then you pay attention more.
Sure, I thought my attention would more wander in the, am I willing to read through 10 dialogue choices for my character? Because that's something that often came up in New Vegas, is like you just had so many lines to read for yourself and try and figure out what the implications of saying each one would be, which is why like I was a huge supporter of the switch to the dialogue system that Mass Effect came up with, that Fallout tried to copy. I thought that was fantastic from an RPG player experience, of being like, you know what, there are some times where I'm just gonna say the good guy answer, so just give it to me. Like I don't need all these choices, because I'm always going to look for these specific things. So they just made that simpler. It was like, rather than
appreciate the dialogue wheel thing that's become a thing in games. I get it. It does work, and I do like it sometimes. Maybe if they could get a middle ground, I think I'd be happy.
So what do you think about, do you use the full dialogue interface mod for Fallout?
Oh,
or
yeah.
have you?
I have to. Just because I think, same as other players, you pick an option, and it's not what you thought it was going to be. And I don't want my player to say that. I want them to say what I want them to say. So at least if I can see the whole line, I know what they're going to say. And that's something I've tried to do when writing player lines. I've tried to make whatever the shorthand option is that will appear on the dialogue wheel, it's close enough that you can hopefully get an idea of what the player will actually be saying. So if at any point you click an option and the player says something you didn't expect, I'm very sorry. I tried, but it is difficult sometimes.
Well, I think I actually think that was very smart of them to map the things to like, this is generally the button people mash to get through. So let's make it the positive, or like this, and then we'll put the negative over here. So that way players can give, like they can just learn that shortcutting. And I think that to me, it was very smart because it was recognizing how most people play RPGs. Because I think we all do the same thing, even in the ones where we can read it. We generally are reading through. We've got an idea how we want to play it with that character. We're like, I like this character. I'm gonna say yes to what he has to say. So like not having to read through the lines to find the yes, it was smart. But like you said, sometimes the question wouldn't be just a simple question, and it would end up taking things down a weird route, and that was very annoying when those things would come up. So that's where the full dialogue interface definitely seems to be a benefit. But maybe, I think a hybrid might work, and maybe they've already done this in full dialogue interface. I actually haven't played with it because I really like the dialogue wheel system. Would be to put like an icon next to each one so you could see what style it is.
I know some games have done that. I think Dragon Age went that route.
Even
though I don't like
right.
Dragon Age 2 that much, it was still a slightly better system maybe than Dragon Age 1, which I still like.
I actually loved Dragon Age 2, but I hated the gameplay at first. But I think the story is fantastic. But yeah, the gameplay is too arcadey.
If anyone listens to this, which I highly doubt, who worked on that game, you are lazy. The amount of levels that are exactly the same that you just copy pasted and then bricked off a wall, I noticed, and everyone else noticed. For shame. Yeah. But I know.
I think a lot. I don't think that. See, I bet that to me felt like that was a side effect of the EA style culture of that. We got to pump out these franchises yearly, like because EA is all about the sports games, and I think they tried to apply that same methodology to their other franchises, and they suffered for it because Assassin's Creed had the same problem, but that was Ubisoft and not EA. But either way, I think a lot of these games are going through the growing pains of let's try and apply the sports game model, because sports games are where all the money is. Let's try and apply that to some of these other franchises. And they didn't recognize that, unlike sports game players who just want, the gameplay is always going to be the same. Like you aren't going to change the rules of football. You're not going to change the rules of basketball. So people don't want massive sweeping changes, whereas players who are playing, action RPGs or, just any other type of game, they want to see new gameplay. They don't just want to see, we're not just looking for reskins. We want to see, something different each time. And you can't do that in a year. Like you can't completely reinvent the wheel in a year. And so I think they're just that period of gaming, it seems to have dried, like it seems to be going away. Like I know they took some time off of Assassin's Creed to try and fix that series, and now Dragon's Age seems to be on hold, and I bet Mass Effect the same thing is that I think they're recognizing like, okay, doing that model for this game, these style of games is going to hurt our franchises. So yeah, so we were talking about Dragon Age Origins, and did you feel that they successfully brought it back to an acceptable place, or do you feel like they still catered too much to that action audience?
I've yet to play much of Inquisition, so I can't give it.
Inquisition, sorry, I keep calling it Origins, but Origins I think was something else.
Origins is the first one.
Right. Inquisition. Did you play it enough to taste the gameplay, the actual fighting mechanics and stuff?
It was a while ago. I did like the mechanics. I think I liked the mechanics of of Dragon Age Origins, because it was that you could play it in first person or you could play it top down. I thought that was clever. That was smart. I appreciated that, and I would switch between them depending how I was feeling. In Dragon Age 2, they went the more Mass Effect route of third person and sort of that feel of it, which for a fantasy game, I don't know. I think I appreciate the isometric view that you get with fantasy games. But then the Witcher series kind of went the closer, more personal route as well, and they're great. So I don't know. I'm still upset with Dragon Age for Dragon Age 2. Now that's not fair, because Dragon Age 2 is a good game. It's just not a Dragon Age game as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. I think it It reminds me of one of those spin-off series of a game, like Fallout Tactics. Fallout Tactics is a
Yeah.
fantastic game. Was not necessarily a great Fallout game because like the story wasn't there, but that was I put in tons of hours into that game because it was a great tactical strategy game and it had the flavor of Fallout, but it lacked a lot of the story. And I think that's one of those, and this is a great transition point because there's something I want to talk about with everybody, is one of the things I'm concerned with 76 is they're sacrificing the characters, and we're going to find out very soon because the beta's coming out in just over a month, of whether or not the characters were a quintessential part of the Fallout experience. To me, I think they are. What do you think about that?
I'd agree. I think the characters are part of the environment, and the environment is a big part of what you remember. I think
Now,
they
do you
may be
agree
on
with
the line.
that? Having said that, you don't remember any of the Fallout 4 characters.
I don't remember the characters so much, but I remember the places. I remember things I did. I remember cool things that happened. Skyrim, again, I think did it slightly better because I remember some of those epic dragon battles I had where I only just got by. Those are cool. Those are good memories. Fallout 4 doesn't quite have the same. The Deathclaw, not really the same thing. But there are a few of those memories there where I have, like, the reveal of Father. Now, some people have said, oh, I saw that coming a mile off. I didn't, so I'm an idiot because I thought that was, oh my god, I didn't get that. That was cool. That's only one of those moments, but a lot of the moments of Fallout 4 they weren't intentional. The moments I remember, it's just because of I like playing survival. So a really epic battle that maybe would not have been an epic battle. It wasn't meant to be. I was just really underleveled and didn't have the right equipment, but I succeeded. I remember those, but I don't really remember any of the character moments, which is a shame.
See, so then
I
it
can't
sounds
think
to
of
me.
any.
Well, that sounds to me like then you were speaking exactly what Ted Howard has been talking about with 76, which is that they're more interested in having organic gameplay moments come up because I think that's where people really enjoy the game. And it sounds like maybe you agree with them, even if you're not certain about it.
Maybe I might actually agree with them. I don't know. I think
Because
they just
I agree with
work
you
best
on
from the
Skyrim.
characters.
Is that my favorite moments in Skyrim were less about the story and were more about the like, holy crap, I can't believe that just happened. Like, I can't believe I just survived that dragon attack that I didn't expect to come. Like, those were some great moments. Or like, when you're fighting off a group of mages outside and all of a sudden a giant ends up in combat and it was like, holy crap, like he just went flying, like that mage just went flying. Like the stuff like that is very memorable, and it does come from dynamic gameplay systems and not from actual story moments.
You know, maybe they're right. Maybe me being kind of skeptical about 76, I'm all wrong, and the developers are perfectly right that people don't care about story and characters. They just want cool environmental stuff. I think maybe they're just giving up. I think maybe they did work better on the characters, then you got the best of both worlds. So I'm still going to be skeptical.
Yeah, I'm very skeptical because like Fallout 4, I do have some moments that I remember a lot of. Like I remember most of the quests in Good Neighbor I thought were phenomenal. Like teaming up with Bobby No Nose or like hunting down the Triggermen. Like I love the quest series there, and I always remember those. Or that sequence with and I can't remember his name, so that's going against my point. Who's the mayor? The guy that's
Madunnahay.
What's that? No. The mayor of Good Neighbor, the guy who ends up on your team, the ghoul. The guy in
Hancock.
all the Hancock. Thank you. Hancock does like the speech out there and stuff like those moments. I remember a lot of. And for me, one of my favorite things in Skyrim is the thief quest line and the Dark Brotherhood quest line. I think those are phenomenal. And like I've loaded up those games and just played through those and then been like, okay, I'm done with that character because I enjoyed them so much. So I think that there's a lot of great character development in those, and I'm a little concerned that without that, I think it's going to be sorely missed for those of us who are big into the RPG as opposed to just the action gameplay. But I think from a business standpoint, I think 76 is brilliant and makes a lot of sense because you're tapping into the survival market, which is huge right now. You're tapping into the Twitch market you have cool stuff to show on screen with the nukes and with the the kind of squad gameplay of like having 4-man teams or whatever. Like I think that is very smart from a business standpoint. But the reason I wanted to bring this up and get your opinion on something is what do you hope happens because we're in a very interesting situation in that we are developing experiences for a game that might become obsolete. So what are your hopes for the Fallout community after 76 releases? What do you hope happens?
I don't think a game ever becomes obsolete. As long as there is someone who plays it, you will always have an audience. And if a game is good enough, it will retain that audience forever. It'll be a lot smaller than it was originally, of course, but you'll have people who will go back and play that game. And we all know games that we have like that that we'll just remember and we got to go install again. And even though they've aged and maybe they don't look that good and maybe the mechanics are clunky, you can still enjoy it. You can still love it. I think we're going to have that with Fallout 4. It is one of those games. It's old. It's already old. It showed its age when it came out, as far as I'm concerned. But I enjoy it. I like it. It is fun. I like the gameplay. I like the characters, even though I think they're underdeveloped. And I like the experience I can have in that game.
So the question, so how often do you find yourself, and this is where I diverge on what you just said, is how often do you find yourself going back and playing Fallout 3?
Fallout 3, not as much. New Vegas, on the other hand, I've played that through 5 times. I've not played it ever since I started playing Fallout 4, and I think that's just because I've been spoiled with the Fallout 4 engine. I think they did improve, but then we get into the whole Bethesda keeps reusing the same engine thing. So you see the
dark rabbit hole.
You see the improvements that they've made on the engine, the same engine, but now it's slightly different, and you appreciate those improvements. And when you go back to an older version of the engine, yeah, you do think, no, it's not quite the same. But New Vegas has enough of his experience. I could go back and play New Vegas now. I'm replaying Jade Empire, which is an old BioWare game. It's kind of a predecessor to Mass Effect. So it's similar enough, although it's much more aged. But I can still enjoy it. And I'm pretty sure Mass Effect, I keep calling Fallout 4 Mass Effect 4. We've talked about Mass Effect too much. I think Fallout 4 is one of those games. I think Fallout New Vegas over 3. 3 had a great environment, and it was a great reintroduction to the Fallout universe. But New Vegas nailed what the Fallout games are. And I think maybe that's what Bethesda have to do. Maybe they just have to get in another studio to play in this world they make and create the stories and the characters. Maybe they should just team up with Obsidian.
Yeah, it's interesting to go with that because they're very great at creating worlds and creating sandboxes, but they do seem to lack in the story department. Because for me, the big thing with Fallout 3 and why I have trouble going back to it is I felt that it was too dreary and it was too hard to tell where I was. Like I would often get lost in the sections of downtown DC, and I just was never excited to go there. So it was like, I don't want to get to the end game because I find it too bland and repetitive. And so like I'm never like inspired to go back to it. I have played through it a few times, but I think the Commonwealth, on the other hand, they did a great job of making the entire time you're wandering around, every environment is unique. There's lots of set pieces to remember and in very distinct places. Like if you
they learned from their mistakes, I think
they definitely did. But at the same time, now mods are still filling in a lot of gaps on things they missed out, and that's kind of what New Vegas got to do too. Is they took, the Bethesda laid down the foundation, and then New Vegas got to build on it and enhance it. And I'm finding the same thing with Sim Settlements. Is like I created a great foundation, but in the core game there was a lot left to desire, and the add-on pack authors were able to step in and fill in a lot of those gaps so that I wasn't steamrolled into oblivion, because like trying to build the amount of buildings they built by myself would have killed me. Like I would have burnt out real hard on that. So I get kind of where Bethesda's at in that, is that you kind of need, until the system is designed and built and played with for a while, it's hard to know how to manipulate that into a direction that's also well done for story. Like I think that there's almost 2 stages there. Like first, the first version of a lot of things end up being, a little clunkier until you get a chance to really play with them as a player and see where all those shortcomings are. It's kind of hard for the first draft of a lot of things to be the best. So it's kind of like, the first version of Xbox is basically, if you compare that, like for example, like the not necessarily the controller or anything, but like the dashboard of the original Xbox compared to the current gen is like, it's just unusable as an interface, and like stuff like that just comes from trying it out, seeing what works and what doesn't, and like it's hard to do design those things in a vacuum without getting some outside feedback.
Well, hopefully we don't fall into that too much, because we have the experience of building upon something that's already there.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I didn't even need to bring it into the Sim Settlement sound. I was just I could feel for Bethesda in that regard. But I guess the ultimate point was that I find that once the next generation of these games come out, like for example, I can't go back and play Morrowind anymore. Loved that game. Was probably at the time, it was the greatest RPG I'd ever played. And going back to it now, I just miss too many of the new mechanics that have been introduced to smooth out gameplay. And so I'm a little concerned the same thing is going to happen with Fallout 4 is 76 is going to introduce enough improvements to that people will get over the online part of it and move on. And, that would be sad to see as a person who's heavily invested into the game. Having a big audience is definitely a draw for me of knowing that I'm not just creating something for me, which is definitely how things always start, but then like to encourage me to continue to go. I like to know that I'm doing something for a large group of people. It's kind of like if you imagine you were writing when you're writing, like you appreciate that there's going to be a lot of people seeing it, whereas it would be much harder to write a big epic story if it was like something you were just going to hand to your mother. Do you know what I mean? Like if it's just for one person, it's a lot different than if it's for 10,000 people, which then makes it much different if you're writing it for 10 million people. Like there's a difference there in motivation and how much time you're willing to put into things.
I think we're going to see the numbers. I think Sim Settlements is going to be one of those mods, and I think Fallout 4 is going to be one of those games. People will go back and replay it, I think, because I would, and I do, even if a newer version comes out, because I could go back and play New Vegas. I can go back and play games from when I was born, and I love the old LucasArts adventure games. They've aged really bad in some respects, but the game itself, the characters, the story, I'll go back and play it, even though there are games that play way better than them. Like Mass Effect, I will play Mass Effect.
I own every single released version of Grim Fandango. I cannot get enough of that game. I own it on multiple times on PC. I own it on all the consoles they've released it on. Like I'm so supportive of that game that every time it comes out, I buy it, even though I have it, just to give them my money. It's kind of like how a lot of people, donate to Sim Settlements is just like they're just being supportive. They don't need to pay for it. I try and do that with that because I want to see more of that out there. Like if Schaefer announced he was doing a Grim Fandango sequel, like on Kickstarter, I would throw so much money at it. So I'm with you on some of those older games are there's enough to them that you just can't get enough of it and you can continue to go back to it. I'm just concerned that Fallout 4 is not one of those. I think there's enough reasonable complaint about the game, about some of its core systems that I think a lot of players experience, because New Vegas was one of those that does not have that, and people will continue to go back to it over and over again. I'm wondering if Fallout 4 has that same has the same legs. I don't know if it does or not.
I guess we'll see. I think we might be okay though.
I know we will be. I know Sim Settlements will be fine. I think we have enough. We have a great core audience, and we got enough press over the last year from various outlets that people are interested in what we're doing. So I think we'll get some people to come back, especially with the magnitude of the release we're working on right now. But it'll be interesting because 76 definitely changes the dynamic quite a bit.
I don't think 76 is going to be what buries us, if anything.
Well, it'll be our own internal struggles with actually building this thing. So, all right. Well, I think I don't want to end this on a down note. So, is there anything you would like to say to the audience of these videos in your experience on gaming or on Sim Settlements or anything at all?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say thank you, because if you're listening to this, you've supported us. And whilst it may not directly come to me, it does come to the project, and that does make a difference. It allows Gaff to keep doing this, and he very much is the guy who keeps this all together. Now, he hasn't paid me to say this. That's true. I hope you enjoy what we make.
Awesome.
That's it.
All right. Well, it's been nice talking with you. Thank you for all of your services on the mod, and I am very excited to get your writing into the hands of the masses, because we've got some very, very cool stuff coming. All right. Let's end it here then.
Okay. Bye.